I'll be speaking in Welsh primarily, so make sure you have your headsets on. Diolch I Helen Mary Jones am gadeirio'r sesiwn yma ag I Academi Morgan am yn gwahodd ni yma I fod yn lansio yr cyfres o gyfarfodydd cyhoeddus sy'n ymdrin ag ymgynghori ar ddyfodol yn cynulliad ni. Alla I ddim meddwl am gwell lle na fan yn yr Academi sydd wedi cael ei enwi ar ôl Rhodri Morgan, prif weinidog y Cynulliad Cenedlaethol am 10 mlynedd, I fod yn cynnal y cyfarfod yma am ddyfodol yn y Cynulliad Cenedlaethol ni. Ac mae'n wir I ddweud fod yr Cynulliad Cenedlaethol a sefydlwyd nawr yn 1999, bron 20 mlynedd. Hello, David Rees. An Assembly member I'll be telling off for being late. Croeso, David. Mae'n 1999, ers 1999 sefydlwyd, etholwyd y Cynulliad Cenedlaethol cynta yng Nghymru. Ges i'n ethol y pryd hynny yn 1999 I gynrychioli Ceredigion ac fe oedd Helen Mary ar y pryd hynny hefyd yn Aelodau'r Cynulliad cychwyn yna. Felly mae'n 20 mlynedd erbyn y flwyddyn nesaf ers y cychwyn hynny. Ac o edrych nôl ar yr 20 mlynedd yna, yr hyn I ni'n ceisio gwneud nawr wrth cychwyn ar yr ymgynghoriad yma yw meddwl am beth fydd yn Cynulliad Cenedlaethol ni yn Senedd ni am yr 20 mlynedd nesaf a mwy. Nawr, Mae Deddf Cymru 2017 sydd ar fin dod I rym yn nifer o'i hagweddau yn cyflwyno model o ddatganoli sydd yn newydd I ni yng Nghymru, model sy'n seiliedig ar gadw pwerau, y Reserved Powers Model. A golyga hyn fod y ddeddf yn nodi yn glir pa pwerau sydd yn aros o dan reolaeth San Steffan gan dybio fod popeth arall wedyn holl feisydd eraill wedi cael I datganoli ag o dan reolaeth y Cynulliad Cenedlaethol. Ac bellach, erbyn hyn, mae gan y Cynulliad Cenedlaethol bwerau I gytuno ar rhai trethu yn hefyd, ac o'r flwyddyn nesaf ymlaen o 2019, bydd hyn yn cynnwys y pwerau am y tro cyntaf I amrywio treth incwm. Felly, chi'n gweld yn barod fod y cynulliad sydd gyda ni erbyn 2019 yn mynd I fod yn un wahanol iawn i'r un etholwyd gyntaf bron 20 mlynedd nôl. Ac fe fydd y pwerau o fis Ebrill yma ymlaen yn bwerau fydd yn cynnwys meysydd megis ynni, cynllunio, ffyrdd a fforddladdoedd a'r pwerau hynny yn llawn. Ond yn ogystal â hynny, ac yn benodol iawn ar gyfer yr gwaith I ni I gyflwyno heno, fe fydd Deddf Cymru 2017 hefyd yn rhoi'r pwerau i'r cynulliad am y tro cyntaf dros yn trefniadau etholiadol a mewnol ni'n hunain. Tan mis Ebrill y flwyddyn yma, tan nawr, yna San Steffan fydde wedi fod ar grym yni ac wedi medru newid gweithdrefnau a maint y Cynulliad Cenedlaethol. Ac felly mae hynna oll yn newid, mae'r grym a'r penderfyniadau nawr yn mynd I orwedd yn nwylo pobl Cymru gan eich cynrychiolwyr chi yn y Cynulliad, ac felly ni eisiau defnyddio noson fel heno I glywed ac I drafod gyda chi am eich barn chi am beth I chi'n credu yw dyfodol eich Senedd chi yma yng Nghymru am yr 20 mlynedd a mwy nesaf. Felly gobeithio gewn ni dipyn o drafodaeth yn dilyn y cyflwyniad mwy manwl mae Adrian Crompton ar fin rhoi, a diolch yn fawr iawn I chi am eich diddordeb mor belled ac edrych mlaen I gael sgwrs ymhellach ar ôl y cyflwyniad gan Adrian.
Diolch, Llywydd. Yes, I'm Adrian Crompton. I'm one of the senior staff at the National Assembly, and I've been leading a lot of the work that we've done in this area with the expert panel and developing this consultation. The question of the capacity of the Assembly and whether or not it has enough members to do its job effectively has been around pretty much since the start of devolution. So we had the Richard Commission in the early years of the Assembly. The Silk Commission commented on the issue as well. There have been numerous studies and commentaries on the issue. But as the Llywydd just said, this is the first time when the Assembly itself has had the power to do anything about that. The Llywydd first spoke to me about it maybe 18 months ago, and indicated that she wanted to work with the other political parties in the Assembly to try to address this issue and develop a very wide political consensus. And that is significant, I think, as a backdrop to this work. It's very unusual that Etholaeth or any body other than the Welsh Government would be contemplating bringing forward legislation of this significance and this scale. But that's a signal, I think, of the sensitivity of this and the importance of developing, as far as possible, a very wide political consensus for any change. One way in which we have sought to take some of the party politics out of what is clearly a very sensitive issue is to establish an expert panel on reform. This was a body of experts in the field of parliamentary work and parliamentary capacity, and also specialists in the field of elections and electoral systems that worked through 2017 to produce this thing. This was their report. It's a hefty tome. I won't be reading it all out, but I will be going through some of the detail, and I will try to hopefully pitch it at the right sort of level so that I don't bore you with the detail, but give you enough to inform your thinking. But this was the brief that was given to the panel. There were three core questions that they were asked to consider. Firstly, what should be the size of the Assembly? How many Assembly members does it need in order to operate effectively as a Parliament? And flowing from that, how, if we were to have a larger Assembly, should those members be elected? And the panel was also asked to look at the issue of the minimum voting age, and specifically whether the voting age for Assembly elections should be lowered from 18 to 16. So I'll work through those issues one by one, if I may. As I said, the Assembly size, the electoral system, and who can vote were the core issues that were given to the expert panel. The consultation document that you have before us and the legislation that we will bring forward, hopefully later in the year, will cover a few other issues as well that are related to the same sphere. So specifically some issues of electoral law, disqualifications, that's what criteria should disqualify any of us from standing for election, and also a few issues related to the internal operation of the Assembly. So not quite as sensitive, but important nonetheless, and I'll just give you a little bit of detail on those. So the first key issue that the panel considered was size, and it's important, I think, for me to stress that the panel considered those three issues, size, electoral system, and franchise, in that order. They felt very strongly that it was important to, before starting to think about electoral systems, to have answered the core question, how many members does the Assembly need in order to function effectively? So they started with the issue of size. And their headline conclusion is that the Assembly needs between 80 and 90 members, compared with the 60 that we have at present, in order to operate effectively, given the powers and responsibilities that it now has. I've worked in the Assembly an awful long time, and I've been involved in some of the studies I mentioned earlier. This piece of work, I can confidently say, was by far the most robust and thorough assessment of this question that has ever been undertaken. The panel clearly looked at the changing role and powers and responsibilities that the Assembly carries. They looked at the positive impact of scrutiny, and I think this was a core issue for them. If there is to be a case made for there to be more Assembly members to do the work that Assembly members undertake, then we have to be able to demonstrate what value that work gives us. And so if you have a chance to look at the panel's report, you will see a lot of work there to demonstrate some of the real concrete benefits that come from much better scrutiny and accountability that Assembly members provide. That drives better decision-making by the government, better decision-making over spending, better decision-making over policy and legislative change. They considered too whether there were other ways that the capacity of the Assembly could be increased, bringing in expert advice from outside, changing the working week, changing the pattern and the approach that we take and so on. They looked in particular at the functioning of the committee system. David Rees is a chair of one of our main committees, so we'll be very familiar with this issue here, but an awful lot of the core work of the Assembly is driven through our committees. They look too at the varied roles that members have. So this is not simply an issue that members are rather busy when they're in Cardiff Bay working on committees and in plenary. Members have many different roles. Many of them hold important offices like committee chairs and the Etholaeth and so on. They clearly have duties to their constituents, take on casework locally, campaign for particular issues. They have duties and responsibilities to their parties and so on. So the panel looked at the whole gamut of the roles that members undertake. And they also looked in some detail at how the size of the Assembly compares with parliaments elsewhere in the UK and further afield. Within the UK, clearly the Assembly is by far the smallest of the devolved legislatures. It is smaller than 9 of the local authorities that we have in Wales, and it is small by any meaningful comparison internationally of parliaments with comparable powers. So, this is an important slide because if there were to be more members, it would cost more money. And you'll see that the estimated annual costs each year for an additional 20 members, so remember the panel's recommendation was that it need to be between 80 and 90 members compared with the 60 at present. An annual cost that would be 6.5 million higher than it is at present, and 9.5 million more for an additional 30 members. There'd also be some one-off costs that you would face at the very start of a larger assembly with adjustments to the infrastructure and so on. So in total, the estimated cost in the first year is something like 12 to 13 million for an assembly of 90. That sounds like a lot of money, but I think it's important to keep it in perspective. The Welsh Government and the Assembly is responsible for the control of about £15 billion of public expenditure each year. The additional costs that we're talking about here amount to around 0.08% of that Welsh block. And as I said, it's important too to remember the positive, very real benefits that better scrutiny and better accountability can bring. Also, to put this in some perspective, a year or so ago, it looked as though there might be fewer MPs representing Wales at Westminster. That's still not out of the question, but perhaps looks unlikely. And over the last few years, questions have been asked about local government reform as well. Those two things, we don't know quite where we're going to end up, but one thing we can be certain of is that there will be no MEPs representing Wales in a few years' time. The annual estimated cost to the public purse of a single MEP, the Treasury estimate to be around £1.8 million each year. So for the 4 MEPs that we have in Wales, that amounts to some £7 million a year, which as you see is broadly in the same ballpark. Having addressed the question of size, the panel moved on to the electoral system that ought to be used to elect a larger assembly. They looked at just about every electoral system that there is operating in the world. As I said at the start, these were some of the best experts in this field that you will find anywhere in the UK and in Ireland. And they assessed all of those systems against a set of principles that they established, 10 principles that they felt were important design features for any electoral system. issues such as proportionality. They felt that it was important, if we were to change the electoral system, that the assembly would be certainly no less proportionate than it is at present, and preferably slightly more proportionate. Issues such as voter choice. They felt it important that we identify systems that put power and choice into the hands of voters, that there is a direct accountability between elected members and voters, and so on. So they assessed electoral systems against their criteria and narrowed the field down to 3 that they felt adequately met those different criteria. And these are they, and I'll run through each of those in a little detail now. This is a busy slide, but I'll try to run through it for you. Mixed member proportional system. That's another way of describing the system that we use to elect assembly members today. So in today's assembly, we have 40 members who are elected on a constituency basis, first past the post, and then 20 other members who are elected through regional list-based systems. So this would be a tweak to the current system. And so it has a strength in its familiarity to voters in Wales. A feature that the panel felt was important for any electoral system was that we look at ways to encourage and enshrine diversity in candidates and the elected assembly, and in particular in relation to gender. So the assembly has a very proud record in terms of gender balance, but the panel recommended to the assembly that we look for ways to build that into the legislative system, that we hardwire that diversity of candidates into the system. And the mixed member proportional system that we have at the moment, because it has a list-based element, gives us a vehicle to do that. It has some limitations, however. We have 2 different categories of members, constituency members and list members, and that is the panel considered was a weakness. And it also, because we only have 40 constituencies to work with, kind of limits us to an assembly of 80. It would be very unusual, in fact it would be unique to have a system that follows this model that would have more list members than constituency members. So that constrains us to an assembly of 80. The second system, this one is the panel's preferred model, the one that they recommend most strongly to the assembly to consider, single transferable vote system, or STV. STV is used elsewhere in the UK for some elections. It's used in Scotland for local elections. It's used in Northern Ireland. It's used in Southern Ireland, and in many states and provinces in Australia and elsewhere in the world. For a voter in an STV system, we would go into a voting booth, and rather than simply place a tick or a cross against a named candidate, we would be asked to rank them in order of preference. So if you want, you could just choose your favourite member and put a number 1 against them, and that would be fine. That would count as a valid vote. But you could also express a preference for a number of assembly members. So you'd rank them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the advantage of this system is that it results in a much more proportionate outcome, and it means that votes count. So if I vote for the member that attracts the highest number of supporters at the first stage, that candidate will be elected. But then the surplus votes that that member has attracted will be, we'd look at the second preference. For the second preference is that the people who had supported that candidate had expressed, and those votes would then be distributed across the other candidates. Similarly, for candidates right at the bottom who hadn't attracted a large level of support, their second and third preference votes would also be distributed across the other candidates. And so working through those different iterations, we would continue until you had returned the desired number of members for your constituency. So as I say, it gives a very proportionate outcome. It means that votes count equally no matter who you vote for, and gives a very direct line of accountability between individual assembly members who are elected and the voters who support them. The third system that the panel put forward we describe as a flexible list proportional system. So this is a little different in that the political parties in each constituency would put forward a list of their candidates in an order that they had decided. As voters, we would go into the booth and we would have a choice, either to vote for the political party that we wanted to support, or, if we preferred, to vote for one of the named candidates within the party list. So if I wanted to vote for Plaid Cymru, I could do that. But if I wanted to vote for Elin Jones, who was for some unaccountable reason, not the top candidate for Plaid Cymru in Ceredigion, I could choose to do that. And if individual candidates attracted above a particular a defined quota, they would be elevated up the list. So the system looks to balance the party control and influence that comes with a list-based system where the party decides which members it wants to put forward, and voter control. We as voters would have some influence over the election of named individuals from the candidates. One of the great attractions for the expert panel in this system is that more so than STV, it would enable the Assembly to hardwire some rules around diversity into the system. So it could, for instance, require the list of candidates to be ordered male-female or female-male all the way down so that we get some balance in that way. This is not a familiar system to us in the UK, but this system or versions of this system are used right across Europe. It's probably the single most common electoral system that is used anywhere in Europe. If we were to introduce an STV or flexible list-based system, it would mean changing the boundaries of the constituencies that we use in Wales. So in either of those systems, what we would be doing would be to elect between 4 and 7 members for each constituency in Wales. So the panel needed to look at how to construct meaningful and workable boundaries if this system were introduced. And what they wanted to do was to work from existing lines on maps, existing constituencies or areas that we have to work with at present. So they came up with 2 options for the Assembly to consider. This was their preferred option. As I said earlier, there are 40 constituencies for the Assembly at present. The panel have suggested a way in which those constituencies can be paired up to give us 20 new constituency areas. And as I said, with an STV or list-based system, from each of those 20 constituencies, we would return 4 or 5 Assembly members. This is an alternative that the panel have put forward as a workable option. This map is based on local authority areas that we have at present. So by combining some of the smallest local authorities, and by splitting Cardiff, because it's by far the largest, into 2, the panel has suggested 17 new areas. So from those 17 new constituencies, STV or a list-based system would return between 4 and 7 members for each of those areas, depending on their population size. The third issue that the panel had to consider was the minimum voting age. And in a nutshell, the panel have recommended that the minimum voting age should be lowered to 16. One of the issues with arguments around the voting age is that there is not a huge amount of hard evidence on which to go. There aren't many countries in the world that have altered the voting age in that way, or have altered it in that way sufficiently far in the past for us to have seen yet what effect that has long term. What the panel were convinced about, however, is that lowering the voting age to 16 could give a meaningful platform to help increase political participation and awareness amongst the young people of Wales. In part, that is because of the situation in which people at age 16 find themselves. By and large, they are likely still to be within the family home. By and large, they are likely to be in full-time education in one form or another. And so they are situationally in an environment in which registration is more likely to take place and in which they can be sensibly exposed to the political process. The panel recommended very strongly to the Assembly, if it wants to take this forward, that this should be accompanied by a serious programme of political and citizenship education for young people in particular. Relevant to this is the fact that the Welsh Government, separately to this exercise, have just consulted on whether or not to lower the voting age to 16 for local elections. And they've signalled that they intend to do that. Which leads on to this next slide. There are a few other issues that are covered within the consultation document, as I said at the start, that are outside the work of the expert panel, but are still relevant to this field. In particular, question of whether all legal residents in Wales should be able to vote or not. So, present, obviously, citizens of the EU who are resident in Wales would be eligible to vote, and that will alter after Brexit. So that, you will see, is one of the issues on which we are seeking your views. Second point is whether certain categories of prisoners should be eligible to vote in Assembly elections. As I said just now, the Assembly government, the Welsh Government, is considering bringing forward some changes to the local government franchise, and in limited ways, that's one of the changes that they are looking to bring forward. And at a UK level, similar changes are being contemplated. So that's another issue on which we're consulting. And fundamentally, the issue here is about whether the franchise for Assembly elections should mirror exactly the franchise for local government elections. Disqualifications, these are the rules, as I said, about who can stand to be an Assembly member. And so you will see in the consultation some questions there about some specific changes to those rules. And just moving to the end now, the internal arrangements. These are desperately important to me and to the Etholaeth, though probably not to many other people, but there will be some who have an interest, a niche interest. These are some of the practical operational features of the National Assembly, which at the moment are constrained by the legislation that we work within, and we have an opportunity to bring some flexibility to those. Electoral law, the Electoral Commission and the Law Commission, so these are independent statutory bodies, routinely will assess the operation of electoral law. And over the years, they have made a whole package of technical recommendations for change. If we're able to bring forward this legislation, then this will be a sensible vehicle potentially to implement some of those more technical changes. And so you will see in the consultation that we ask for views on that as well. That's all I need to say at this stage about the content of the consultation. But in a way, this is the most important slide. We really want to hear what you think about all this. So as Helen Mary said at the start, please, if you haven't done so already, please let us know what you think, either through the booklets that you have before you or by going online and filling in the consultation there. And if you don't want to plough through all of that, if you just want to express a view on the size or the electoral system and the things that interest you most, that's fine. And this is the final slide, just to give you an idea of the next steps and the timetable we face. This consultation exercise runs until the early days of April, so the closing date is the 6th of April. And in July of this year, the Assembly Commission, which is chaired by the Etholaeth, will consider the results of the consultation and decide which, if any, of the aspects that I've described it will develop and take forward in the form of legislation. And all being well, that will lead to the introduction of a bill in autumn of this year, royal assent in the summer of next year, in order to have any changes in place by the Assembly election that will take place in 2021. Having said all that, for a bill of this nature to pass through the Assembly, it has to attract an unusually high degree of political support. So it is required to be supported by 40 out of the 60 Assembly members. So clearly it needs a very wide base of political support. And so during that period, the Etholaeth will be taking a view and taking the temperature, I'm sure, with the other political leaders and parties in the Assembly to see whether or not there is sufficient political consensus to take forward any or all of the changes that I've described. Diolch yn fawr.